Giannotta, and I am a music education student at Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota. Today, I'm here to share some of my recent research in music education with you all. I'm also here with some of my friends of mine, Zoe.
Hi.
Alex.
Hello.
And Olivia.
Hi.
How are we all doing today?
Good.
How are we doing?
Doing all right.
It's finals week. You know, we're all getting down to the punt. We're all getting down, but it's going to be okay. We're all going to make it. All right. So I would love it if we all could go around and just talk a little bit about, who you are, what's your major, what year are you, what instruments do you play / sing or whatever. I'll go first. Obviously, I said my name's Emily. I am a senior vocal music education major. I sing mainly, but I do also play the piano, the clarinet, and some saxophone from time to time. Alex, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I am a senior vocal music education major as well. My main instrument is my voice, though I do play on the piano a little bit, and I used to be a saxophonist, though not anymore.
All right, Olivia?
Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm a senior elementary education major, and I play the cello on and off.
All right, and Zoe?
Yeah, I'm a senior instrumental music ed major, and my primary instrument's the tuba, and this semester I'm doing percussion as my secondary.
All right, so the aim of this podcast is to discuss some of the research I've been doing into music education's history, some of the ideas that have led to how music ed is implemented in schools now. I also want to try and make this as approachable to the average person as possible, and as such, we're going to try and go deep without going too technical any which way, and we'll go into definitions if we need to talk a little into definitions of things that are said. So, y'all ready? Period. So, first off, let's talk about what we know about music ed in general. Let's just go around and just give a little background on what you know about the history of music education, if you know anything. Maybe if you know anything about how things have progressed with time, or any general things about how music education has gone on, how it's developed, things that are done. Obviously, some of us might know more than others, and that's okay. So yeah, you are welcome to go ahead and share whatever you think of. Whoever wants to kick it off.
Well, I can start with this. I know that in the early days of more public education in places like Greece and Rome, music education was very, very highly valued in those societies. And unfortunately, it's been a little bit of a steady decrease since then. I feel that music education is definitely far less valued than a lot of the other subjects that are taught in schools, to the point where some districts just, when they don't have enough funding, music education is oftentimes the first or one of the first things to go.
Mm-hmm. And we're definitely going to get into that, so. Anybody else got anything?
I know from my experience here at Gustavus that one of the required things for elementary education teachers to take is the elementary music course, because the Minnesota state standards say that you, as a teacher, even if there's not a music teacher in the building, you are required to be that music teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and going off of that, both what Alex and Olivia said is that we do go to a liberal arts education, and one of the core elements of liberal arts education is music, the arts, and so the performance-based aspects, and so that's a very key role into education, both here and everywhere else.
Or at least it should be.
It should be.
It should be, and we're going to talk about it. All right. Thanks for sharing. So we're going to talk a little bit about ancient Greece, like Alex just touched on a little bit. So obviously we've all probably heard or at least learned a little bit about ancient Greece in school, but most likely you don't know as much about what they thought about music and music education. Obviously that was a long time ago. So out of curiosity, does anyone know what the ancient Greeks thought about music or music education?
I would say maybe at the top of my mind is like one of like the main ways that they were educated, like through music and through like poetry that went alongside of music.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Yeah, another thing was that music was very much still centered around the church during this time, and a lot of the big time scholars like Aristotle and people like him felt that it was very necessary to learn music, and then a lot of them had some disagreement about whether or not you were allowed to enjoy learning music and performing music.
Mm-hmm.
But the consensus was that music should be a spiritual experience for the ones performing and for the ones that were listening, and because of how important the church was, and when I say the church, I mean the Catholic Church, because of how important the church was, music education was very highly valued during those times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As our resident non-music ed major in the room, do you know anything about music in ancient Greece?
Not really. I know that when my grandmother came over from Italy, she is Catholic, and she was required as part of her schooling. She went to a Catholic school. She was required to learn learn the piano. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't have a ton about the church during this time, actually, but, you know, it's very good information. And it's definitely something that adds on to kind of like what I'm going to talk a little bit about, because, you know, the church definitely did have a lot of influence throughout all of history on how music was learned and taught. So, but specifically talking about music education in ancient Greece. So this is a quote from Plato. He argues, "Rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul, on which they mightily fasten, imparting grace and making the soul of him who is rightly educated grateful. He that studies music praises and rejoices over and receives into his soul the good and becomes noble and good. He will justly blame and hate the bad." So what do we make of that? What do we make of that quote?
I think when I hear that quote, I hear that like music is part of a person a lot, and that like if somebody took away like that music, that they wouldn't be a whole person anymore. I don't know. That's what I kind of get out of it.
Oh, I like that. I think that's awesome. What I wrote was music has the power to influence us for better or worse, and thus should be studied in schools to make sure that we're properly being educated, because, you know, there's good music and bad music in quotes, and so we should be being educated on music in schools according to Plato, because he's like, there's only some music that's good and some of it's bad and you shouldn't learn that. So Plato had his opinions, and Aristotle agreed with Plato in that, like, you know, music is a really big part of a person, and we should be educated in music. But like you said, Alex, Aristotle was like, hey, we can enjoy music as well as learn from it. We can use it for our enjoyment, not just learning. He also talked about how we should be performing music as well as listening to it. We shouldn't just be listening to it, we should be performing it in order to get those benefits. And then just as a whole, music was a huge part of the school system because of how influential it was. It was a large part of the curriculum. Music was taken super seriously as an academic subject. Pythagoras, who, Pythagorean theorem, like math, he made the connection between music and math and how some of those same, rules of numbers and science apply to music in the same way they apply to, the rules of life and the universe, which is pretty cool and to think about that all the way back then they were talking about that kind of stuff. So from those facts, what do they show us? Does anything surprise you or make you think in a new way about music in ancient Greece or music ed in ancient times in general?
I definitely am drawing a connection to the fact that since there was a huge emphasis on music education, I can picture seeing many images of people from Greece playing instruments or gathered around people playing instruments or singing in a lot of their just paintings and artwork and architecture and stuff like that. And I think that the art showcasing that is definitely reflective of the heavy emphasis on music education in Greece.
Olivia, it seems like you have something you would like to share.
One of the things that I was thinking about is the math connection with the music, and that is something that we can take and learn from now, because there are so many math connections that you can have with the fractions of music and how you make the different notes that are really helpful when you are first teaching those fractions and those manipulatives in math in third and fourth grade. That I think that will really benefit our students.
So you're talking. So to kind of summarize what you're saying and put it in a little more maybe layman's terms, you're talking about how music is fractions. There are notes that are specific lengths and the measures that our music is broken up into. Modern music each note is a part of that measure as a fraction, and using those as kind of ways of explaining that. I think that's really awesome. I think that's a great connection. The fact that we had that connection all the way back in ancient Greece is crazy, and we'll talk a little bit more about some other connections between music and math and science, but I think that that's really awesome. Zoe, do you have anything you want to share?
No, I'm on the same track as Alex, is how I kind of am thinking about how music played a lot of important roles back then, but I can't, I can see it in the pictures and stuff, but I can't picture it because of how it is now, how we'll get to it later in this podcast, but how I can only see how important that is in the artwork and in the artifacts that we have been seeing, because of how music education or even just music in present day has not been valued at the same level as it was back in ancient Greece or ancient times.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we'll see how that progresses as we keep going. So just to kind of summarize what we just talked about, so talking about how there was this big importance on music and music education in ancient times, and the fact that they put so much emphasis on it in schools. There was a lot of emphasis on how it makes you you or changes you as a person, and how a lot of this can still be applied to today, at least in practice, or at least not in practice, at least in theory, we kind of see some of those things that might be connecting as we go forward. So, all right. So now we will very briefly touch on the Renaissance. So I'm going to take a guess and say you probably don't know as much about music education in the Renaissance as other time periods, but just in case, is there anything that you know, especially my friends who are in music theory or music history with me right now?
I might be wrong here. I might be going a little later or a little, like, in the wrong time period.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
But kind of having an emphasis on learning from others, I think comes from this time period. If I'm remembering right, around this time period, maybe later in the Renaissance period. But learning from more, like, the people around them, or, like, learning music from the people around them by ear is a lot, I think, if I'm remembering right. So, like, that's kind of, like, music education is, like, having to learn music by other people in, like, churches and other places. Because a lot of, like, music was not written. Some music was not written down. So you have to learn that. And so you have to learn how to read music in a way.
Yeah. So the Renaissance is actually the transition between the two.
Yeah.
The Renaissance is the time that, like, which I can start jumping into my stuff unless somebody has something. So I'll just bring that up first then.
Yeah.
That this was the time where we kind of switched over from just learning mostly by rote to learning by, like, just hearing things. And we started getting standardized music notation that didn't look exactly like what we have today, like the bar lines and the staff and all that kind of stuff, which is just what music looks like. It's just how we organize it on a piece of paper. It wasn't exactly the same, but it is starting to get close where there's lines for specific notes, and maybe there's a clef, which is basically just telling you what notes go on what lines. And also, the big thing during that time is the invention of the printing press, which meant that things can be a lot more widely disseminated now. People can get music out there if they want to print their own music, if they have access to do so. If they're rich, they have access to do so, they can do that. But that also means that, like you were saying, Zoe, it can be much more widely shared with people, and they can recreate the same things without having to listen to it. They can look at it on the paper and say, okay, this is what this person wanted, and I can recreate it. Which means that music ed is becoming standardized at that point. The music you're learning is becoming standardized in the way that you do it. And so we're just kind of moving that process along of, like, what it means to learn music. How do we do it? Now things are changing. Music is still very much a respected subject and is taught in schools still regularly, just like in ancient Greece. Music and math come together when we're talking about tuning and temperament. Now, obviously, those are not, like, terms that everybody knows. So when we're talking about tuning and temperament, we're talking about the sound frequencies that come from any given, note you play, thing you sing, whatever, and how those frequencies and those sound waves sound together. There are different systems. Obviously, we've come to a point in history now that we've adopted one, but there were multiple in that time, and it was based on sound waves. It was based on how they sounded together and how that would work. What sounds good, what doesn't, how far apart, in quote, the notes are, how, like, how much do their waves differ from each other. So music is still for both learning and enjoyment, but now something you could do, you could make a living with music, and it's a lot more heavily accepted, where, like, in ancient Greece, they would have thought that was a no. Music was for learning, it was maybe for enjoyment if you were an Aristotle fan, but it definitely was not something very common to be a professional musician. You could be a professional musician in a church, you could be a professional musician in a court somewhere, you could be a court musician. So lots of new stuff that's coming up. Kind of to summarize that, they kept a lot of those, like, same ideas as the Renaissance and, like, thought, but they had some, like, modern technologies, modern ideas that, like, pushed things forward a little bit about, what music ed should look like, what music making should look like in that time. So now, again, what do these facts show us? Does anything surprise you, make you look at things a new way? And besides what we've kind of already talked about, can you think of any connections between the Renaissance and ancient Greece?
I think it's really interesting to see, as we see with many things throughout history, as technology and societies become more advanced, the way that we learn things alters. You were talking about how for the longest time the only way you could really learn to learn music was by listening and and performing what you heard to the best of your ability, whereas now with the printing press we can write down music and we can print it out and we can send it out, sell it if we have enough money, and standardize the way we learn music a little bit. Yeah, that's what I got. Maybe I'll come up with something else.
And like going off of that, I think that kind of a connection that I kind of was thinking about between ancient Greece and the Renaissance is how that like even during ancient Greece, music did not start where it ended in the time period. So like right now we saw how it can form over ancient Greece, and now it's like doing the same thing in the Renaissance, but like I feel like at the same rate of speed, it feels like, because like ancient Greece, you get new like instruments or like new random ways of like doing a thing or hearing things, and so if you start off with like one person doing stuff and then that grows into two people, then that keeps on growing. Well, here now you got the printing press, which you start off with like the music that grew through ancient Greece, but now has gone through like the printing press, got printed, got notated, and now is spreading like wildfire, but like still like keep on growing, and then everything grows off of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it definitely is something to keep in mind though. You know, during the Renaissance, ancient Greek ideas came back.
Yeah.
And so they took those ideas and they said, all right, we're going to take them and we're going to make them even better now that we can do things. But what I'm understanding you to say is like, there was just like a similar trajectory of like how progress is being made in terms of music and music ed during these times.
Yeah.
Which is fair, because these are definitely big periods of human history that we know about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else to wrap us up about the Renaissance? All right, 5. So yeah, generally what we talked about, same stuff. You know, bringing back those ancient Greek ideas, talking about how modern technology has helped us advance what music looks like and how music is taught, and talking about music still is kind of like an academic subject. It still is very well respected. Okay, so let's head into this final part of this conversation. Music ed today, something we all sort of have some experience in one way or another. So, obviously, some of us here might have slightly different ideas, slightly more knowledge than others, and that's okay. But tell me, what are some things you know about both ideas and practices today around music education? How are we seeing music education play out from all of your experiences before we dig into the research that I did?
Yeah, I know like something that we've talked about in class, but also has just been on my mind, is how like back then they're getting new technologies in the Renaissance and stuff. So like the printing press, but now we're getting like iPads or like the web. Wow, sounds old. But like internet and ways, and like MuseScore is a way that a lot of people have been getting music that like one person just posts on the internet. And so it's kind of like that, is that now in this new digital age, we're like sharing music at a faster rate, but it's the same idea. It's like you make music, and before the internet, you had to like go to a store or like get a publisher to publish it, and then somebody has to go to the store. Now you just make music on your own iPad and you publish it to like MuseScore or like a website, and then like millions of people get to like see what you post. So that's kind of relating back to the Renaissance. And like even with music education, is we're finding so much more music to teach and more music to have like explanations. Even back in the time of like we're finding like music from sources that we would probably never have found if it wasn't for internet. So it's kind of relating back to new technologies that happened.
Yeah, and I'll dig into that just a little bit about music is so much more accessible now. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And with it being accessible, that also, with the technology that has made it more accessible, it's also allowed us to, I think, learn more effectively, and if you're performing things, learn to perform things the correct way, because there's a lot of, you can reach out to people who wrote down the music and composed it. You can ask them how they'd want to do it, how we should learn it. With that, I think that music education has become incredibly standardized, which I love and I don't love, because it means that the students can all be on the same level with each other. They can all know the same things, and it makes it easier to progress from class to class as you're moving up in the world. But it also kind of takes away a little individuality, I think, as they're teaching the kids. I don't know. I think overall, I think it's a net positive. I'm saying that like there's a huge downturn. There's really not. The technology we have now definitely makes it much nicer to teach music. Way easier to find music to teach to students. All that good stuff.
Yeah.
I think that having that connection with technology has also made it easier to connect with students who are on the younger side of things and may not have discovered yet all of their music and what they're wanting to listen to, as well as what they're wanting to play, because having that technology means that you can go into the classroom and have those conversations with those students, and they know some of their music tastes already at the third grade level, which is really interesting.
For sure. Yeah, you guys have basically already just covered my first point. Good job. So yeah, I went a little bit into how accessibility to music has opened the world to its influence. We talked about how, Plato and Aristotle talked about how music is influential in our lives and how it has the power to do things. And now we see music being used for all sorts of things. Music is a big part of social movements, bringing things along. You can express a wide range of emotions through music, and like we were kind of talking about with this, music students have the potential to learn about so much more music this way. We can get music from, the, most remote part of the world. We can get music from there now and be let's study this and see what it is. I literally wrote in here, can you think of more things? And you guys already basically came with everything. So that's great. Do we know anything about kind of how your body and your brain react to how music works? You may know some, I don't know, but anybody got anything that they know, happen to know?
I think, going off of my Grey's Anatomy knowledge, your part of your brain, it might be the hippocampus, it might be another thing, part of your brain, but it gives off more, not electrons, why those words, but it gives off more,
Neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Whenever you hear music, it livens up a lot and reacts to the music and in a positive way to allow for you to feel either relaxed, calmed, or angry or sad. But it gives you more feelings whenever you listen to music that you are not at when there's no music.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know a lot of the science behind it. I just know that music, for my mind and body, is really important. it encourages me to get up and move when it's more lively music. It encourages me to relax when it's more calm music. And yeah, I listen to music all the time, so it is, I would say it's a little bit ingrained in my mind and body. Yeah, and I sometimes will have physical reactions to hearing music, like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to put it as simply as possible, what I understand it to be is when we hear music, our brains kind of signal to our bodies and it changes heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, depending on kind of what the feeling is that is being evoked. And your brain basically says, okay, I need to get ready to translate any of these like connections coming through, things that are happening. I have to translate them into emotion, basically. That's what the brain does. It's like, okay, this is the emotion we're feeling because of this music. And your body kind of reacts in a similar way. So obviously from there, we can kind of like surmise that music ed has the power to like create a lot of like physical and emotional satisfaction for people. Creating music is something that's really satisfying. In a lot of ways, and it can't be denied, which is, I think, why a lot of people stick with it through their schooling. And obviously, we know there's a lot of other benefits, like social benefits. There's a study that I read that actually talks about the social benefits of prolonged music education, and some of the things that they talk about are connectedness to peers, leadership skills, self-esteem, work ethic, all those kinds of things that are social benefits. I'm curious if any of you have experience with any of those things, any of those social benefits of music, whether it's something that I mentioned or another one, if you want to if you're like, this is another one that is really important.
I would say that throughout my lifetime socially, I have met the vast majority of my closer friends through music ensembles that I've been through. Whether it be me starting choir in 6th grade with a bunch of people that just wanted to perform some music after school, because the way we did choir in middle school was kind of weird, or whether it was me joining band and meeting a bunch of friends through band and stuff like that. And as I've moved on and come to college, that trend has continued also. So yeah, thanks music for helping me with that.
Yeah.
I have certainly met some of my very good friends through music and music ed. But I also know that one of the other benefits of music is the movement piece of it. And having those 5-minute breaks for children is very helpful with the music, so that they can get up and move their bodies and be social for a little bit while also learning and doing those things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that's going to set them up for success in order to gain more of those skills. Like you talked about, they're going to be social with each other most likely, because music and dancing are innately very social parts of our culture, but also they're more set up to be successful if they have that in their day, I think. Yeah. Have that little break, have that little bit of stimulation, and then go, okay, now I'm going to get to work and I'm going to do what I need to do. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think another social benefit is, first off, meeting friends, but also meeting complete strangers through music. Music brings everybody together, no matter who you are, no matter what you believe in, who you are as a person. But through music, you performing or you sharing a piece or a snippet of a song allows for strangers to just come up to you and start conversations, which allows for more thinking and more outward, not being more inner, inner thoughts of how you did, but more outward validation. But having these conversations with random people affecting their lives also through music is a benefit
Yeah.
of everybody.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is it gives you self-esteem because you're like, oh, I did this thing and it's
Yeah.
good, you know, and hearing that validation, but also like having an opportunity to discuss something with people. And I think that's wonderful because it opens up a lot of conversations, especially pieces that have like that significant meaning to them, you know. It opens up a conversation. You can have these conversations with people that you would have never talked to before. Yeah. And I mean, I know from my experience, I definitely, obviously I've made a lot of friends through music. That's why you're here. But obviously I've taken on a lot of leadership positions and in choir and band throughout high school and college, and that has really helped me. And it's something that encourages me to work hard. You know, you see the end product of something like our Christmas in Christ Chapel here at Gustavus that like is such a big deal, and you see the end of that and you're like, yeah, I want to work towards that over and over again. Yeah, so I think we're probably all aware that while all of this exists, all of this knowledge about how music is good in many, many different ways, music education is good in a lot of different ways, we all know that music ed is kind of on a decline in a lot of ways. And even though it's kind of stated by a lot of the big, you know, corporations and bodies about education at a younger age, like talking about like College Board, you know, which is like one of your like avenues in terms of choosing a college and figuring out what you need to do to get to college, and I think it also runs like the ACT, that kind of thing. And Common Core, which is a big deal now, about like making sure that everybody's getting the same education and getting, or maybe learning different ways of doing things. They say it's important. They have public statements that say as such, but data is obviously not showing that. So a study that was done in 2013, they talked to a bunch of principals of middle and high schools, and they were like, hey, you know, do you have a music program? And a decent chunk said yes, but when asked, like, how many do you have? How much funding is there? That was where it was like, well, there's not that many classes. There aren't that many kids taking them. But funding was one of the biggest issues. And that boils down to, like, school boards not funding music. Obviously, it's one of those things that when you're running low on funds, it's the first thing to go, which is crazy, I think, because, you know, we just talked about all these benefits that music ed has, and yet, you know, it's gone pretty quickly. The other thing that we can talk a little bit about, because I didn't know much about this, but I think this is really interesting, is that music ed has kind of taken that back seat in part because of No Child Left Behind, which was a Bush administration policy designed to get rid of the achievement gap for underprivileged students and kind of standardize the education that American students were getting. But it made it so that core subjects are prioritized to the point that all of their subjects end up taking a back seat. So reading, math, science, all those kinds of things are very much at the forefront. Everything else takes a backseat, which is really interesting. Did y'all know that that was like a thing? Because I would not have guessed that that was a thing.
No.
Never
correlated, like,
Exactly.
No Child Left Behind to music ed being on the decline.
Exactly.
Neither did I, but as you're talking about it,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
It makes total sense.
Exactly.
Well,
That was...
No, that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, that was one of the biggest things that I was like, wow, that's actually makes a ton of sense, but it was never something I thought of before. Even being generally in the education world as a kid. So because of this, obviously music ed classes are kind of declining. There was actually a study in 2004, which is another thing that surprised me, that out of all of the like elective classes, music ed classes are losing students at a much steeper rate than other classes. So we're talking like even like physical art, theater classes, phys ed, which is physical education, so like gym, the like home ec type classes, those kind of classes. Obviously they're not, home ec has kind of taken a nosedive as well, but because this was done in 2004, but At the time, it was nosediving like at almost double the rate, essentially, that students were just choosing not to do it anymore. And because of this, obviously, there are less teachers coming in to fill positions, and the cycle it's a vicious cycle that just keeps going and going and going. So, that's my research. So again, I'll ask, what do these facts show us? Does anything surprise you or make you think in a new way? And then I have some other questions, but let's start with that.
I think it is pretty well known that music education, the percentage of classes and districts that have those programs is declining. It's been declining for a while. I think it's a little bit frightening, especially as someone who's going to be a music teacher. And I also think it's really interesting how we seem to have all these facts and figures and information that show how beneficial having a music program is for children, especially the younger children, yet we still decide to underfund those programs and sometimes do away with them entirely. Mm-hmm. I find it frightening. I find it really interesting and difficult to understand why that's the route that a lot of places are choosing to go.
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting that the No Child Left Behind Act has a relation to the music ed declining, because I think that the kids who are that were being left behind would really benefit from the music ed part of the day, and having that movement, and having that ability to learn from the music and learn from as I was saying earlier, learn from the notes and learn from those different parts in math and learn your ABCs from notes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not something I thought of, but honestly, that's a really valid point, that a lot of the kids that were being left behind could really benefit from those things. And it's funny that No Child Left Behind, that was kind of the point, was to try and make it equal for everyone, and yet still, even at a lower rate than like middle class, like schools that middle class families would go to, there's still much less music ed in like inner city schools and that kind of thing, which is a little baffling, but what do you think, Zoe?
Yeah, kind of going off of what we were talking about earlier, is like the No Child Left Behind policy is a new age policy. Like before, like the Bush administration was, I think, was like around 2000. Yeah.
Around that time.
Around that time, music was a thriving, like, in schools. It was like a main part, but also like going back all the way throughout history, just music was very important for everybody. It's an important thing in life, and now it has changed, but like music education is not important, and like now it's just like what you hear on the radio or from your phone or anything. That's like where a lot of kids nowadays get their music, and not through actively doing it themselves. So they're not getting this different use of their brain in a way that music education can help a child who will thrive in a music classroom, but maybe not in a math or English or science classroom, but they can thrive in a classroom that allows them to think differently.
I feel like you have something to say, Olivia.
Zoe said exactly my point, which is that these students would thrive in that different environment, and having the different way of thinking to be able to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you guys are saying actually works really well into my next question. How nice. So, we're gonna get a little creative here, okay? If someone, like just a random person from ancient Greece, or the Renaissance, maybe Plato or Aristotle decided they wanted to time travel here for some reason, or just a Renaissance person, okay? They time traveled to us, and they looked at music, and they looked at music education. What do you think they would think, okay? What would they like? What would they not like? What advice would they have for us? Because inevitably they would have some. So,
Definitely.
creative.
When you just said that, the first thought that came to mind was, I think they would be disappointed. I think they would be like, what the heck? We worked so hard to get this so far, and you literally just crashed and burned. But also, there would be, some advice. They would be like, yo, guys, let's just, make sure music stays a part of everybody's lives. Even through listening. Listening educates people, but, we should be listening to not just a one genre, but, listening to so much and trying to make music wherever we can. And even, in children, kindergartners, if they want to play around, play with their pencils by drumming on their desk, that's okay, because that shows that they are learning something through music.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Aristotle or Plato came here. I think they would be kind of disappointed that music has been so incredibly de-emphasized in our schooling. I think they would be very interested to see how the technology has made learning music actually quite a bit easier, and that we can distribute our music far more easily and more widely with the printing press and now the internet and stuff like that. But yeah, they're not going to be happy about where music ed is at right now. Absolutely not, no. And I'm sure that they'd have their opinions about what we should be learning and performing music for. And those might differ too, but in terms of strictly teaching people music, I think they'd be interested to see the different ways that we teach now, but also disappointed by a lot of the other parts that have been hampering people's music educations.
Yeah. I think Plato and Aristotle would probably be like, what is this way that you're reading music? You don't just listen to it?
Right. What is notation?
What is this? What is this way you write music?
What is the screen right there?
Wait,
they would go.
What?
The mirror.
The mirror.
They would be so
They
excited.
had puddles back then.
No, they'd be like, what is this? They would be so confused by the internet and how quickly we can just click a button and
A Big Mac.
It's like, hey,
Yeah.
there's music in front of you or in your ears or crazy.
Part of me also thinks that those two in particular had a bit of an ego, so they'd be like, part of me almost thinks like they try to pull off like, oh yeah, I predicted this would happen. I know how to use this now. But
That's fair.
I'm thinking about my kindergarten classroom that I was in right now, and if they came into that classroom, how disappointed and sad they would be, because they have the 4 main subjects in the classroom, but they don't have music in the classroom. And it would be so beneficial to have the music throughout the school day, to have that learning happening there. And yeah, I think that they would cry.
something I just thought of that maybe would have been more helpful earlier, but I think we can still relate it to here. So absenteeism is way up all across the country right now. Children are missing school at a much higher rate than they have been in the past. And I know that it's not only just because of in-school things. A lot of it has to do with outside of the school. But I do think that more children would show up to school if they knew every single day they could go to school and at some point in the day have a break where they could have some sort of music class, or like we talked about before, physical education class where they can get up and move around and do something different, stimulate different parts of their brain. And I think that music classes fall under that sort of category. Yeah. And I think that would help with all the absences that are happening.
Yeah, I think in that vein we also can think about, like, I didn't mention this, but something else from ancient Greece was kind of like the balance between like the body and the mind. You know, like music was one thing in Aristotle's kind of framing. There was like your mind and your soul, which was like the music side of things, and then there was gymnastics, which was essentially just kind of like physical education and getting up and moving, and how there needs to be that balance, and how they really like emphasize having both of those. And we still, almost every year, you have to take a physical education class, but you don't have to take a music class every year. You can choose to, but you don't have to, or even any kind of art, really. But you know, we're talking about music ed here. One other thing that I wanted to bring up about kind of what they might think is how both ancient Greece and the Renaissance were had put so much emphasis on music as an academic subject. That was a thing you studied. That was a thing you like really went in depth in. And we here at Gustavus had to make a T-shirt to make that clear. We had to, make that happen because there are people on this campus that don't see music as a respected academic subject that you can study. And I'm sure that Plato, Aristotle, or someone even from the Renaissance would probably be like, what? Like, you've done all of this, like, advancing of technology and you're not, like, putting this into, like, you studying how music works? Obviously, we know much more about how music works, but, like, obviously we still don't know everything. We still don't know everything about anything. So, I feel like they'd be like, what is this? Like, they'd look at our music is academic T-shirts and go, why do you need that? Like, duh. They'd probably like, what? So obviously we've kind of gotten into it a little bit, but I kind of posed at the end of my paper, like, we need to take some actions. What actions do we need to take, friends? Obviously there's the music ed perspective of like, us going in as music educators, or just educators in general. What do we need to be doing? What actions do we need to take as we head out into the great wide world of teaching?
And in my mind, like, the first thing is to allow any child to do whatever they want in music or in, like, the school atmosphere, and, like, having them have the opportunity to have a music class and to move around and to just, like, not practice, but, like, just, the word is coming to my mind, blanking my mind, but just experiment with music and allowing them to see what they like and don't like for themselves, and not through a systematically, I believe, wrong system of not having a music class like at all your elementary years, or even like some middle schools don't even have it. So like that is, I think we should allow children to figure it out by themselves, but have the opportunities for them in all age levels.
Yeah. We could argue that the science says that music should be a part of our lives, literally, forever. And Greek philosophers, they said it too. So, but we don't have that. So, but we gotta work for it. What else?
I think that just in general, they're nationwide, and maybe in world, we'll stick nationwide, there needs to be more government spending on education, just in general. Especially in the maybe lower class areas with poorer families, poorer students, poorer schools. There needs to be higher, better funding for education, and in turn, fewer programs are going to get axed or reduced. Mm-hmm. Whether that means taxes have to be raised or whatever it be, or just a larger portion, maybe a portion taken from like military spending or something goes into education. I think that would be a huge help.
Yeah, that's definitely a big discussion that I think some people are starting to put out there of like, we need to have a bigger discussion about the system as a whole. We're getting there, not quite there, but we're getting to a point where we're starting to have those conversations about how to fix the systemic issues in our system, but we'll see how that goes. Olivia, you got anything?
I think that one of the things that we need to remember on the younger side of things is that, yes, math, reading, science, and social studies are really important, but you need to make time for that music time, that gym time, those special times, because there are students who they may not be learning the reading or the science or the math if you're teaching it the standard way, but they're learning that math, that stuff in that music class, and we need to make time for those students to have that music time, even if it's the music teacher isn't there at school because the school doesn't have the money for that. You still, as a teacher, need to make time to put that music in so that those students are learning and benefiting from that.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with some of the things that, again, we talked about with ancient Greece, where like it's not something I brought up originally, but it is something that was in my research, was how both Plato and Aristotle were very adamant that like you should be studying music from a young age. This is something that should be a part of your life for your whole life. As long as, obviously, once you're at an age for being in the educational system. And so, it's something we definitely need to do. Something that I think about is both talking about advocating for your program, especially as music educators, but also educators in general who are supportive of music and advocate for those programs to stay. Obviously, sometimes it's not necessarily your decision, but it's something you could do, is use your voice and say, hey, music education is important. The students are benefiting from it, and academics benefit from it. So let's keep that going. As well as, I think something comes down to we should be taking advantage of the fact that we have the access to music that we have, that they didn't necessarily have in ancient Greece or even the Renaissance, even though they did make some steps towards making music a lot more accessible. We have so much music that exists in our world, all over the world, even all through the United States, and I don't think we take advantage of nearly enough of it in an educational setting. We need to be taking more advantage of some of that other stuff, because that's how we're going to keep kids engaged, keep kids learning, show that there are crazy, we may not be able to get through just by stats and statistics, because obviously that's not working, but showing that kids are learning something that is, I guess in our world, is deemed more acceptable. Obviously, we know that music is a very esteemed academic subject. We've been studying it for, a while now, but not everyone is going to understand that. So I think there's ways of doing it, and I think we need to make it accessible. So, okay. Large takeaways from this discussion. Big things, connecting things together. I would love if you could connect it to the research we talked about. But large takeaways for music ed in general. Yeah, please. I would love to hear.
I think a big takeaway I have heard while we were talking is that music has been important in everybody's lives throughout history, through the past hundreds and thousands of years. And so we can see through these examples of ancient Greece, Renaissance, how their music is such a key part to their livelihood, and now it should be a key part of people's livelihood, but it's in a different way. And so I think taking some things from those time periods and bringing it to modern day music will allow for more appreciation of the music through the eyes of like the music playing and the music person, the musician.
I think one of the big takeaways for me is they had that music ed set up in the Renaissance there. They had that time to make for that music ed segment. Why are we not doing it here?
It's a good question.
Let's make sure we're taking that time to have that music ed segment every day.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is music education. It's just really interesting how with the passage of time and the easier ways we're able to learn and teach music, how it's just seemingly become more and more obsolete in the eyes of, I guess I'll say, the people who make the rules, or and it's really interesting how we don't seem to be. And I know the old adage is like, you got to learn from history, you're going to repeat it. It's really weird that we're just not seeming in this instance to learn from history, and it does make for a little bit of a frightening outlook on the future of music education. I'm hoping that our generation and following generations will be able to reverse course there.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope. Hopefully, with stuff like this and conversations like this and things, being able to like talk through this stuff and be like, hey, they used to really value this a lot more than we do now. You know, maybe we should work on that. Maybe this is something we should think about and get it out there. Well, thank you so much, Zoe and Alex and Olivia, for coming and talking with me today about all this research. I'm very hopeful that you were able to take something away from all of this. So yeah, all right, that's all we have. Thank you so much for listening, and yeah, thanks.